Kevin Bowen, Colts.com featured writer, joining us now on the Menard Studio hotline. Kevin, is that you?
It is me.
Okay,
I
just
got
make sure.
lucky.
I just want to make sure.
We got about 4 lines over here, and I think 3 of them are lit up. So,
and I wasn't sure which one you were on. So, well, unfortunately, like I shot you the email this morning, kind of giving you an idea what we wanted to talk about. Unfortunately, not talking about a win. Really would have been nice if we had that opportunity. But again, nonetheless, the Colts go over to Pittsburgh. The Steelers do what the Steelers do to the Colts for whatever reason. These two teams have had a history where the Colts just don't win in Pittsburgh for whatever reason. It's only happened, I think, twice in the last 12 years was the one stat that was brought up during the game. I know Tony Dungy and Peyton Manning did it once, and I think it was back in the Baltimore days with Don Shula was the last time they had won in Pittsburgh over the last 12 meetings there in Pennsylvania. I guess, where do we start, Kevin? Where's the pass rush? What's going on there? Why can't they get any pressure on a quarterback? Is there any answers for that?
Yeah, I think that was by far the biggest storyline on the defensive side of the ball throughout really the entire game. And it's something that has hurt this team in first halves in recent weeks. And then for a second, you're thinking, okay, you had a nice pass rush in the second half against Atlanta. You did it against Tampa Bay. Now can you take it on the road to a place where, like you said, you've won just once since 1968, which is beyond remarkable for the success the Colts have had over the past decade and a half. But there was just no answer for the pass rush, really no even, hints of a hurry. I know Trent Cole had a sack that got called back because of a defensive holding, but, I mean, when you don't disrupt a future Hall of Fame quarterback, he's going to have the day that he did. And now it's been 2 years in a row that you've gone into Pittsburgh and you just haven't got anything going. So, Robert Mathis and Eric Walden and Trent Cole and Jonathan Newsom, I mean, it seemed like those guys couldn't really get to him in the first half when you tried to kind of rush 4 and drop 7, and then the second half you tried to bring some more pressure via blitz, and Big Ben struck on some big plays. So I think that is going to remain the biggest storyline if this team is able to make the playoffs. Can you consistently disrupt the elite quarterbacks in the NFL?
Well, that's what we've talked about too. We've talked about, hey, all you got to do is win the division and you're in the playoffs. But it's like we don't get to play the division opponents anymore. Once we get to the playoffs, we got to run into a Pittsburgh or a Kansas City or a Jets or somebody else along those lines.
Pittsburgh in the wild card.
Yeah,
round.
You're exactly right.
There's a very good chance that Pittsburgh could be a 5 or 6 seed, and they could be coming to Lucas Oil if the Colts are able to win the AFC South.
Well, and the one thing I mentioned yesterday as we were kind of talking about how it went down on Saturday night, there's been, and maybe the stats don't back it up, I haven't looked, it feels like third down conversions by opposing offenses are converted more times than not. And there was a play with Big Ben, I think it was a 3rd and 10, 3rd and 15, somewhere in that neighborhood, and I had this sinking feeling that they're going to pick this up. And it was the one he ended up taking off and running himself and ended up getting the whatever yardage and then some to make it work. That seems to be something they've struggled with. Is it just, is it just personnel? Is it the scheme? Is there any answers for what is going on defensively? Because there for the last 3 wins, it looked like, hey, the defense has actually been the one that has kind of salvaged those games to some degree.
Right. Yeah, I think the biggest thing has been just inconsistency over 60 minutes, because in the wins against Atlanta and Tampa Bay, your defense really struggled early on in those games. Tampa Bay, it was 12 points at halftime, but you felt like Jameis Winston was in a serious rhythm, and then the pass rush ramped up in the second half, and you're able to really, I think you shut Tampa Bay out in the second half. Mm-hmm. And then against Atlanta, Matt Ryan led that early touchdown drive to start the third quarter and went up 21-7, and then Atlanta doesn't score the rest of the way. So I think it's a consistency over 60 minutes, and I think there's equal parts of the defense at fault. It's the back end as well, as long with that pass rush, and I think it's kind of sprinkled over the offensive side of the ball. At least on Sunday, we saw just no sustained drives. No third down conversions from a consistent rate. I want to say it was a 42-minute drought in third down conversions on Sunday night, which is just astronomical for a 60-minute game. I think there was a third down conversion to Boom Heron late in the first quarter, and then you didn't have another third down conversion until Charlie Whitehurst was leading those final drives. And you can just you can't expect to go into that environment and not sustain drives and come away with anything resembling a chance to win that game in the fourth quarter. So for me, it was those missed opportunities early on when your defense, played all right through the first quarter and a half or so. You really couldn't have dreamed of a better start, frankly, from the turnover standpoint. You had 2 drives start inside the Pittsburgh 25 in the first 5 minutes of the game, and you come away with 3 points. I think that was kind of the lasting, takeaway from that game from an offensive standpoint. It's, okay, if that unit would have put up 10, 14 points early on, it's a totally different ball game.
Kevin Bowen, Colts.com featured writer, joining us on the Menard Studio Hotline. It's Ford and O'Brien, ESPN Evansville 105.3 and online, ESPNEvansville.com. One more for the defense, and then I want to get into the Hasselbeck and Luck and everything else. I think maybe tweeted it out. I don't know. I follow you and Mike Chappell and Bob Kravitz and Mike Wells, and so you all tweet about the same thing during these games. Yeah, it's just a matter of who's going to tell me the stat first, because then the other 3 will follow up. But Vontae Davis, I believe the stat was, didn't give up a touchdown at all last season, and so far this season he's given up 7. Is it just that? Yeah. Is it something in the way he's playing the game? Is it that the receivers he's been matched up against are just a little bit better? Is there an answer there as to why such a discrepancy between the two? Yeah,
it's been too many big plays out of the back end of that defense, and Greg Toller and Vontae Davis would be the first ones to tell you that. And that stat actually dated back to week 13 of 2013, and Vontae hadn't given up a touchdown in over 1,000. I want to say 1,300 snaps, which is just crazy. And he played at an all-pro level last year. And I will give these opposing wideouts credit, because the Colts have played some very good receivers here in 2015, from Julio Jones and Brandon Marshall and Antonio Brown and DeAndre Hopkins, but again, that back end just hasn't played at the level that you need them to play. And the Colts ask those guys to do a lot from a cornerback standpoint. I mean, they are trying to put them on islands to create a pass rush. And when the pass rush doesn't get home, you are leaving those guys on one-on-one islands. And frankly, that's a recipe that isn't going to lead to a lot of defensive success when you aren't getting home with the quarterback. So, yeah, Vontae Davis and Greg Toller can definitely play better. But at the same time, you have to create something up front which doesn't just leave them on these islands after islands well down the field.
What's the latest on Hasselbeck? Last I saw that Pagano was fairly certain he will play against Jacksonville. Is he on pace for that?
Yeah, I think all signs point to that. It's a mild rib separation, which doesn't sound good for anyone, let alone a quarterback that's 40 years old. So I think the expectation is he can get on the practice field a little bit on Wednesday, the first day of practice, and then from then I think you just kind of see how he reacts. It wouldn't shock me at all if he was limited a little bit early in the week, just from a rep standpoint. But Chuck Pagano did say on Monday that he expects Hasselbeck to be under center for what is a critical divisional game.
Jim Irsay mentioning that there's a good chance that Luck comes back for the December 20th home game against the Texans. If not, for sure, maybe for the trip down to Miami here in week, that'd be the 27th. Is Andrew made any comments about on the return, or is he just kind of sticking to the tried and true method of, as soon as the doctors tell me I'm okay, I'll go in and play?
Yeah, he spoke to the media last Wednesday, talked about how he's kind of ramped up everything from a throwing standpoint. Again, it'll be something to watch this week. Does he practice at all? I still don't think he's going to play by any means against Jacksonville. I think Houston, like you said, is more that target date, but I would think that you would like to get him on the practice field in some capacity before you clear him for contact, which would obviously be in a game setting. So he has picked up the throwing a little bit. I think time is, of course, the number one remedy when you're dealing with an Oregon. And I think another thing is, too, how is his endurance? How is he physically? Can he play 60 minutes of an NFL game against arguably the hottest defense in the NFL right now? It's what Houston's shown over the past month and a half if he does come back for that game. So it does look like he could be back for Houston. Then Anthony Costanzo as well. He said on local radio up here in Indy tonight that he's really targeting that Houston game. And, of course, that would be an ideal situation from a Colts standpoint for him to come back when you look at J.J. Watt and everything the Texans have in their front seven.
Kevin Bowen, Colts.com featured writer, joining us on Ford and O'Brien, ESPN Evansville 105.3 and online, ESPNEvansville.com. Okay, I'm hoping you can explain something to me, Kevin. We were having this discussion yesterday. During the television broadcast, Al Michaels, Chris Collinsworth were talking about how Rob Chudzinski sits in the booth and he calls the plays down to Clyde Christensen, who, quote-unquote, translates them before sending them in to Matt Hasselbeck. Can you explain what is happening there? Why do the plays need to be translated before they go to Matt?
Yeah, I don't know if translate is the best word that I would use. I would say more communicated, because from an NFL standpoint, you have to have So basically the quarterbacks are obviously having an earpiece in, and that earpiece has to go directly to the sideline. It can't go up to the booth.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Chud relaying that play down to Clyde Christensen, and then Clyde Christensen then has Matt's earpiece. So then he's the one relaying the actual play into Matt. I want to say that earpiece cuts off at 15 seconds on the play clock. So that's when I think you saw a couple of delay of games for the Colts, a couple of timeouts, I think in the red zone as well, that they had to take on Sunday. So Chud's preference is to be up in the booth. It's something he's done ever since he's been a play caller dating back to college. Other NFL coordinators definitely do that, but that's where the communication chain comes into play. It goes from Chud into Clyde Christensen, the quarterback's coach of the year, and then he then relays that to Matt. And as I'm sure you see on the broadcast, Matt's got an armband with all the plays on it, because everything's a little bit different with Pep Hamilton leaving after pretty much the midpoint of the season. So that's kind of the chain of communication, if you will, for the offensive play calls.
So the verbiage stays the same, though, from when Chud calls it down to Christensen. It's the same verbiage going in to Hasselbeck, right?
I believe it's the same verbiage, or if anything, it's Clyde telling Matt what is on that armband.
Yeah,
so it might Clyde might be the one translating it from Chud, just from a pure, okay, it's play number whatever that is on the armband. So I think that's where the different verbiage from Pep Hamilton to Rob Chazinski comes into play.
Yeah. That makes sense, because the way they made it sound during the broadcast was that, like, Chud was just going, I like the one where the one receiver runs out to the sideline, and then Christensen's got to call it, spider wide banana. Yeah, like, let's just try this. You give it a name and tell Matt what it is. It just sounded weird, and we had that discussion yesterday. Like, why are they not using the same verbiage? But the way you explains it makes much more sense.
That explains it all. Yeah.
And I know one thing that Matt doesn't like about all this is he's a guy that likes to look into the eyes of his teammates when he's in the huddle. That's something that he's kind of talked about, where he doesn't like to look down at the armband, but that's just where life is right now. When you have the new coordinator and you have the backup quarterback, he unfortunately has to look at that armband, and he can't really get a feel for those guys in the huddle like he would like to do.
Right.
It's Kevin Bowen, Colts.com featured writer, joining us as always on Tuesdays to talk all things Colts. Kevin, appreciate the time. Enjoy the game this weekend, and hopefully it's a win.
All right, guys. We'll talk next week.
All right. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks.